afternoon, everyone. I was very recently watching a documentary, in fact, on Netflix, which was Social Dilemma. The documentary is about how data or how big data is being used in the digital world to moderate or to influence behavior of users, groups, or societies. In the documentary, the subjects were people like us, so they called us subject, and we were represented as binary 1 and 0. I don't know, from that time, whenever I look at myself in the mirror, and whenever I look at people, I look at them as 1 and 0. Okay? So that's the impact of data, and that is how we are categorized or used in today's world. The advent of internet and computer happened some time back. So generating data or data for us, right, is not something new. What has happened? So it has been happening, the information exchange in form of systems or humans exchanging data has been happening for more than 2 decades now. What has changed is the volume and the variety of data. Okay? Businesses today are using this data, which is apparently called big data, and that's still subjective because I don't know what big data is. What is the quantum? Is it a terabyte? It is a petabyte, or is it a gigabyte? Okay? Anyways, businesses today have become more intelligent. Businesses have evolved, and then everybody is using data as in the form of intelligence to gain competitive advantage, which ultimately backs up to superior customer experience, your top line, value to stakeholders. And this is not only true for the traditional industry, which is your banking or manufacturing industry. It is happening across. I was just reading an article somewhere that there was an experiment conducted by Laugh Club group, who chose 1.5 million 1 and 0, which are subjects people, and ran some 40,000 jokes through them. And the winner of the event was the following joke. 2 very close friends, right? Brothers from different mothers, go to a jungle for hunting. One of the guy, something happens, he collapses out of breath, okay, and he was gasping. The other friend, who was a brother to him, okay, panics, and he calls the emergency services. He calls up the guy picks up on the other side, and he says, my friend is short of breath, he's not breathing, what do I do? The guy on the other side says, okay, I can help, just calm, relax. Let's make sure if he is dead. This is what the guy on the other side said. This guy, so there was a complete silence for certain seconds, and then a gunshot was heard. Okay? The friend comes back to the phone and says, okay, the guy is dead now, what next? Okay? So that is, I think why I brought this is because data in all forms are available in abundance, but the real intelligence lies in how you change or how you use data, not as information, as a meaningful information. Data can be sometimes misleading. Your business decisions are based on it. Sometimes it could be dangerous. Okay? Now with this, let me once again welcome the wonderful panel I have. And I'll throw the first question to the panel. And this stems from one of the conversations which I was having with one of the central bank regulators in India. We were in a room, and the governor asked, what does a bank do? And there were people, right? Everybody said some English, that bank does this, that, X, Y, Z. But then how he defined banking, primarily, is he said, whatever said and done, bank does the following 4 things. First, account opening. Second, payment and remittances. Third, investment products, which includes mutual fund, insurance, other things. Fourth, lending. Whatever said and done, all the core functions or all the banking revolves around these core 4 elements. Now my question to you, maybe I'll start with Hartnel first. In these core functions or core operation, what role does data play? And what are some of the key challenges that large bank or insurance organizations like you face?
So thank you very much for the question. And I'll say that we as banks do much more than that, maybe as a starting point. Now you have other banks who have mobile phones, and They have telecommunication products and propositions. But just to narrow down to your question, so you're right. Number one, data plays a critical role throughout the life cycle of interfacing with customers, delivering value to them, and maintaining them. And starting off with account opening, I can just pick out two key areas. The first one is actually data management. When you're actually opening an account for a customer, you are actually interfacing with the customer, getting their information. With the multiple laws in place currently, then you have to ensure that you have data management and governance in check. So the kind of information you're collecting, are you collecting the right kind of customer information? Are you complying to GDPR as a law? Are you ensuring that you're only collecting what is required to offer a service? The second part I can explain about account opening, because most people know the process. You basically come, provide your details. We do a bit of governance checks. We check if you're blacklisted. We check if you can offer the product, and we open your account. But the second facet to this is actually KYC and compliance. Now, data plays a critical role here because you may think KYC is just something simple as just knowing more about the customer, getting the right kind of information, and complying to specific standards as per your account opening process. But where data comes in is because in this day and age, you have a lot of cybersecurity challenges and threats. So simple things like mule account prediction. Some of the accounts that are being opened are opened for fraudulent purposes. You have to be able to deploy the right kind of data capacity, data tools, to be able to predict or even identify at account opening level, mule accounts, for example. On KYC and customer experience, I think the customers want the accounts opened as fast as possible. We do have data use cases whereby we are coming in to try and see how do we simplify the process, either through automation, understanding of insights, or knowing exactly how can we keep on providing the better experience to our customers. The second facet and second aspect you asked, so you said account opening. The second one is what?
Payment and remittance?
For remittances, it's very, very broad and dynamic. I think payments has actually taken a life on its own. We are having multiple fintechs playing in this. Data is very important in payments, number one, because of channel optimization and channel performance. You cannot say that you're delivering the right kind of payment experience if you don't understand how your channels are actually used for payments. So that's the first point. You have to know that data teams, data use cases are actually used in the payment world to first understand what is the best experience with the minimum number of steps that you can actually deliver a payment service. The second thing is pricing and profitability. If you're looking at payments, then you have to ensure that you are providing an interface at the right time, at the right device, at the right channel. And the price should be right. We have different types of data science use cases whereby we check what is the best price we can actually charge. Pricing and profitability relates closely with waivers and concessions. We don't charge a service fee for all payment interfaces. Some of them we actually give them for free. Why? Because we know that we will actually get an additional value if we focus on that. The last one is on products. You have data use cases on product rationalization, whereby we check. Remember, the customer persona changes every time within the different enterprises or areas we work in. And we have to keep on adapting our products to serve them better. So you can only have insights that are going to create value for your products team to understand, are the products speaking to the customers and the wants of the customers? And number two is on leads. You mentioned about loans. Yes, lending is a big business. We as a continent are more of borrowers than more of savers. So we have to come up with leads. And I like what we are doing actually at Absa Bank, whereby we are using data science capacity to create leads for our frontline. For example, you can decide to send an email to 100,000 people to take up a new product. But what we do as our data science team is that we go in and check the probability of those customers taking a product. Instead of sending an email to 100,000 customers, we only send to 20 with an approximate hit rate of 80%. Thank you.
So I think you mentioned one important point on customer experience and then banks to be within the regulatory purview. How do you innovate, right? Now my next question, just taking that question forward, first to Simon and then to Olayinka, because I know that as a bank, you have innovated a lot on the digital side. But yeah, on the insurance side, account opening is an important function, right? That's the first step to get into any product or services. What has been your experience as an insurance company who is operative, and what challenges do you see, or in fact, which challenges, what opportunity do you see when it comes to, let's say, primarily plain onboarding of customers? So maybe you can share about your experience in terms of how it is done, and then what would be the ideal way of doing, or how would we progress towards that way?
Thank you. So I think I'll begin by defining or explaining the difference between insurance and banks, because even from our customer onboarding, it is more of underwriting, making that underwriting decision, not just opening an account. And you will realize that from the basic definition of insurance, it is a transfer of risk, where the insured transfers the risk to us, the underwriter, at a premium. So the ability for us to be able to price that risk, to be able to determine how much to charge, and then get into that insurance contract lies with our ability to process the data. So right from the point of onboarding the clients, there's some requisites information or data about this client that we need to obtain to be able to make that decision to onboard that risk. And you realize for us, it begins much earlier before onboarding the customers by designing the solution or various solutions or products, the insurance products. So way before we onboard customers, we first design the solutions. So there's a lot of use of data in pricing and designing the products, basically in product development, so that we come up with various solutions that we as the insurance company feel they are solving the issues or the problems that we have in the market. Then at the point of onboarding the clients now into the products or into the solutions that we have, the requisite data in this case would revolve around understanding the risk and trying to also understand the clients, various, depending on, of course, on whether it's a benefit policy or it's a non-benefit policy, which for simplicity I can give an example. For example, motor insurance, which is a non-benefit policy. So the risk here is on the vehicle, on the item that you're insuring. The benefit policy on the other side, an example is the education policy, where largely we don't assess the value of your child education fees, for example. It is dependent on your ability to pay the premiums. So if you look at all that, for us to be able to make that decision to determine how much are we going to insure, how much are you going to pay in premiums, then we have to process that data. You mentioned about the challenges. Some of the major challenges that we have is as opposed to, or as a departure from the banks, our business as insurance companies is largely intermediated. We deal a lot with intermediaries in form of brokers, agents, and we have independent agents. So you realize that for us to be able to reach that customer, we have an intermediary in between. So that poses a lot of challenge in terms of us trying to reach out to the customer, trying to get the adequate information for us to be able to make that decision. So we rely heavily on information provided by these intermediaries. So that poses a great challenge, which I think my brothers from the banks do not have that challenge.
That's a good way.
Yeah.
So so Inka, one side I see markets which are fully digital, as in the ecosystem allows you a fully end-to-end digital onboarding of a customer. Say something like a market in India, my home market, right? The bank can literally onboard a customer end-to-end digitally, okay, without asking for any image or document, right? You just have your IDs and other numbers to give, consent to give, and that's how the onboarding happens. On the other side, I have seen markets like Egypt, for example, where the entire process of onboarding a customer is physical, okay? The central bank doesn't allow the bank to digitally onboard a customer, okay? Now, looking at both the extreme end, how you as a bank have innovated and what has been your experience in the Kenyan market when it comes to customer onboarding with respect to your solutions and the ecosystem play?
All right, thank you very much. I think I am largely in agreement with the first two speakers. Data or leveraging data should actually be at the core of any forward-looking financial institution. And just like you've mentioned, a lot of the services centers around onboarding, payment fulfillment, and lending. So like you've mentioned, today, there are a lot of innovative ways to actually ensure that the onboarding of customers is done in a very seamless way, ensuring that customer experience is stellar. But I won't belittle that point because I wish I talked about onboarding. So let me just talk about lending.
Yeah.
So in lending in particular, data can play a very prominent role in that instance. So today, a lot of banks have a plethora of data about their customers, transactional data sets, behavioral data sets, and they could utilize this to build algorithms, advanced learning, machine learning algorithms to profile the customer and give them a credit score and a limit. So, for example, if you look at a customer and you've seen that the transactional inflow for the past 6 months, it's steady at about this amount, you can actually prefer this customer to be someone who is creditworthy and I can actually take a loan to the amount of this tune. Looking at behavioral data, for example, as the customer defaulted in the previous loan, or as a customer in a constant behavior where he or she is overdrawing the account. You can utilize all of those informations, put them together in a machine learning algorithm to assess the creditworthiness of this customer. So what that brings to the customer is speed of delivery of loan fulfillment from origination to disbursement. Today, I see most banks, equity inclusive, have gone towards leveraging such algorithms. And then within seconds, the customer applies and the loans are disbursed to the customer's account. So it really solves the current problem of long lead time in fulfilling loans. I know today in some organizations, perhaps not in Kenya, but in some cases in Kenya, you realize that to get a loan can take days, weeks, and even in some rare cases, months. I've seen those situations. But then with the benefit of leveraging advanced analytics, the plethora of internal data sets, also comes challenges. The earlier speakers of the day, we talked about financial inclusion. So now we have data of our customers in-house. What about giving loans and funding the dreams and aspirations of customers which don't bank with us? So how then do we get those external data points and then bring them on board? Those comes with its own unique challenges. Of course, you might need to partner with alternative data sets or aggregators like telcos. And in some instances in the Kenyan markets, they perceive you as competitors, for example. I'm sure you're all aware of this. I didn't mention names. So those are one of the challenges we have. If you need to go into the customer himself or herself, looking at extracting Android data to access the creditworthiness of the customer using alternative data sets like how often has the customer received calls, what amount of credits the customer has gotten, disbursement, and so on and so forth. Just alternative data sets. Then you now have other challenges around consent and privacy. So those are some of the things we can leverage with data in the financial institution and some of the challenges we currently face today.
Yeah, great. So thanks for it. Maybe my next question is to Pramod, because we heard Simon, who comes from the insurance background. We heard Hartnel and Olayinka. The question here is, we have one side where let's say I'll just take the onboarding case. For example, Simon, the onboarding is through intermediary, right? So there's a lot of dependency on a third party of sourcing data and giving back to Britam. There are banks who are much advanced in technology, who have the ecosystem support and the access where much of the job is digitized. They are interacting directly with the customer, okay? Now, as a technology company, how, with your experience in different markets, right? How do you see things changing, okay? When it comes to a bank doing digital journeys versus an insurance company doing digital journey. And so that's the first question. Second question, I'll just take forward from what Inka said, right? You spoke about data, right? Now, a customer who is banking with you, okay, and existing to the bank customer has a lot of data already existing with the bank, okay? I have my credit card data, I have my account data, where my income, I have my loan account with you, okay? And numerous things. Now what happens, and this is the challenge which I personally, feel as a user, right, of banking services, is sometimes I see a gap when it comes to analyzing my journey with the bank with all the data they have, okay? So there are certain data which are in silos and not talking to each other, okay? So Pramod, this is the second question. How do we get away with, data silos, and what would be the best approach in terms of using the existing data of the customer rather than looking for alternate data and things like those? So what's your view on this?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure being with all of you here this afternoon. The response to that question will be a little long-winded, so please excuse me if I kind of set a bit of a context. One, Rahul has introduced me as a technologist. I see myself more as a banker than a technologist as an outset, because I've spent 25 years being on this side of the fence with a bank. I was with Standard Chartered Bank for about 25 years before I embarked on this technology journey. So I will try and connect the dots on what I see as a banker and the kind of challenges that we used to encounter being on this side to what I believe is the challenge that technology companies like ours need to solve for. The first important challenge or element that we all need to understand is that data, if I had to take an analogy, it's like a person who is shipwrecked in the middle of the sea, surrounded by water, and water here is a metaphor for data, but not a drop of clean water to drink. Now, if you can imagine that scenario, we are surrounded by data in everything that we do, right? There is social data that is happening, there is customer data, KYC data, there is behavioral data. But the reality is how you organize and manage the data is at the core of whether the data becomes usable. And that is where I guess I would not want to venture into, that's the expertise of folks like Inka and Hartnel in what they do, right? Which is around how do you organize and manage data for the purpose of decision making. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is there such an asymmetry in the way data is seen and evaluated by the organization? This should have been an easy one, right? If all of us, with the benefit of hindsight, should be sitting here and saying data is easy, you just organize it and what's the problem? Why is it such a big issue? The reason it's a big issue today is because there is a bridge between the past and the future. Now let's take an example of a digital first company like Uber or an e-commerce company. It's a completely digital at source, or a neobank. I know there was a speaker this morning talking about it, right? They have evaluated their customer journey in the context of a completely digital at source. That means account opening is digital, document or any verification is API'd with external sources. There is no manual or an analog process. But the moment you get into traditional organizations like a Britam or an Absa or a Standard Chartered or an equity bank, you have a history. You have a history of decades where you have branches, manual processes, And that entire process somehow has to be reimagined in the new way of what customers like us demand today. So we've all been spoiled by the e-commerce and the digital first companies because suddenly we want that as a benchmark. But the reality is there is a past that we have to somehow bridge. All of us are customers of traditional banks in that sense. And how do we bridge that? And that is where the challenge is. I'll give a personal example. In the case of the bank that I used to work for, the account opening process for credit cards was standalone. Personal loans were standalone, mortgage loans were standalone, auto loans were standalone. So the same customer, if he was taking 4 products from the same bank, was completing 4 account opening forms. And it continues to be the problem in many countries. I hope it is not such a big one in Kenya, but in many other countries that I see, it continues to be that way. Now, data is the same, but there are 4 sources. Now, God forbid, in one of the account opening forms, the mobile number that the customer has, he uses a second mobile number. How do you then organize that to be a common data? So at a very fundamental level, the whole challenge of data is around cleansing and organizing the data in a manner where it is usable. And that is the whole agenda of data science and what these thought leaders are constantly working on, because how do you organize and cleanse the data? Today we all say data is the new oil. Well, if you think of extracting oil from the ground, that oil doesn't go into your petrol tank of your car immediately. It actually needs to go through a process of refinement, cleansing, and only then can it be retailed. It's the same with data. Data has a lot of inefficiency and slag that is there, impurities that are there, things like single customer view. Today, banks, I know for many of the big banks, it's a multi-million-dollar agenda. Get a single customer view. That means for all the millions of customers that are already there, across multiple products, can I get a common view of the entire customer end to end? If that opportunity can be established, if we can make that a reality, everything else downstream becomes an easy problem to solve. And that's where I think as a technology company, Perfios is committed to this entire, I call it the first mile digitization. Excuse me if I'm kind of using a bit of jargon here. You know, there's always this confusion between digitization and digitalization. And I and Simon was just discussing that. Digitization is, data is there in analog form, account opening form, or any of that, you digitize that, that's data. Digitalization is the whole process of reimagining the customer journey on an end-to-end basis using digital data. Now, as an organization, I view these two as 2 distinct challenges. Somewhere we need to bring them together, which is how do you get that first mile of data organized in a manner where everything else downstream can become automated. And I think that is, in my mind, a big challenge, because dealing with legacy is not easy. And somehow getting that process is an industry challenge that both technology companies and institutional thought leaders like my fellow panelists here have to work together to solve.
Great. So thanks. My second question is, there has been a big debate in the past. Okay, now it's not so there, but then it has always been about fintechs versus bank. When fintech initially started coming in, okay, many people started looking at it as a replacement to banking. But we all know that that cannot happen, okay? Now the advantage and what Pramod was saying on digitalization, when a fintech is coming into the market, right, they have evangelized the entire journey to be digital and they have built solution around it. But for a bank, the good part is we work under a regulatory framework, okay? Fintechs are free to do whatever they want. Most of the cases, most of the times, they're not regulated. So they are free to innovate on their own will. But when I'm working as a bank, I have to comply within certain framework. Now, now we have realized that, okay, the coexistence can happen and fintechs can supplement or complement banks in a way. But as a bank, and this is to Inka, right? What does a data strategy mean to you?
That's a very interesting question, and you can see me smiling. It's largely because my call to data was informed by the threats by the fintech. And the response at the time was to have a dedicated data strategy for the organization. So to me, I think a well-documented data strategy should include elements of what kind of platforms would you require to get to the envisioned state. Things like having a data lake that can help you aggregate all kinds of data, both structured and unstructured. What visualization tools do you want to utilize to ensure that your organization is data-driven? So today you will hear things like Power BI Tableau ranking tops amongst the BI tools across board. What data warehousing capabilities do you need to aggregate this data set and then churn out intelligent reports to your end users, both internal and external? You also need to have the element of what operating model you want to run. In addition to that, the organization structure you want to embrace. So I find that most newbies into the data journey tend to have some form of centralized organization structure where they have a team of experts, data analysts, data engineers, data scientists working for the group at large. But as you mature and working towards getting a data-driven organization, you really want to decentralize that, equipping people with the right skill sets and tools. So that then comes to people now. In your data strategy, you need to have the element of how you want the people to acquire the necessary skill sets to bridge the gap from where you are to where you would want to be in a few years. So skill sets that are common in today's climate are things around data analysis. And for me, I find data analysis as a very important skill set, and it's quite important for every one of us to be onboarded on that journey. Why do I say so? Data is produced in every situation, not just in the banking space or the insurance space, across board. If you're teaching, you're producing data. If you're farming, you're producing data. If you're in HR, you're producing data. If you're in procurement, you're producing data. Then it then presupposes that we need those skill sets to be able to derive insights from those.
Thanks. So maybe Hartnel, as a bank, how easy it is for me to do a first principle design when I talk about data being used in innovative form. Because as a bank, I'm a traditional bank, I have a legacy, okay? I have certain way of doing things. How do I adopt a first principle design principle for bank?
So if you talk about first principle, it's either buy or build. And just to pick up from where my colleague was speaking about strategy, I think that's a very important question. I have been fortunate enough to develop multiple strategies in data. There's one I developed actually with a very big budget of more than 1 billion Kenya shillings. Other one I did it with 0 shillings. So I've actually had experience of doing it both ways. But just to simplify the key takeaway, I can speak about strategy for a day. But if you're going to take away something on data and how to actually get your strategy right, pick one word. The word is organize. So for you to actually have a very working and scalable data strategy, number one, you have to organize your skills. You cannot have, as my colleague was saying, one central team. You have to actually be able to know where are you in your maturity journey and identify, do I organize my skill to be central at a point or do I federate them across business? Second thing you have to organize is responsibility. You'll actually understand that data must be owned and taken care of because it is an asset. So who is responsible for what in the organization? The next thing you have to organize is actually your tools. What tools are you whitelisting as a usable tools to organize how data flows across different parts of the industry? And again, you have to remember one icing on the top, which is data literacy. You can never say you're scaling up and having a proper strategy if you don't have people being literate in the way they use data. So buy versus build, I have done it both ways. I've actually had consultants, sadly fired some. I've actually, at some point, did this myself, hired as the only employee, trained people from the ground up. I'll lean mostly to build because I've seen larger impact in value engineering from data by training people who know about the domain. So taking people who are tellers, taking people who are simple risk people, and training them to become data scientists, data engineering experts. They have the domain knowledge. You just have to take them through a bit of training. Now, it depends again. That's the right answer as a consultant. If you actually have a very domain-specific or niche area, for example, within the risk space that you require a specific skill delivered quickly, sometimes getting a consultant to do it for you is going to be very easy. But as you're actually bringing the consultant on board, remember, you have to leave the skills within the enterprise. You have to ensure that the people who are transforming your organization to become data-driven know what they are doing and get the right skills to do so.
Great. So with this, my next question is to Simon and Pramod. And maybe I'll ask Simon first. One of the strongest use cases, and that's true for banking also, when it comes to big data, okay, is fraud abuse, risk, and compliance. Okay, and when I say fraud abuse, it could be during your credit and assessment process. In your case, it could be your claim assessment process. Okay, so as a bank, how do you drive process efficiency, ensuring that these risks are mitigated, and what would be the approach to drive innovation here?
Thank you. I think I'd take the option of the use case of fraud analytics, and mainly, as I said earlier, data analytics or data is the source of every decision that we make. For example, if you're making a decision whether to pay or to take a claim or not, it has to leverage on the data that is available. So traditionally, if you look at the claims process, it has always been making a decision based on information that you receive either, as I said earlier, through the intermediaries or maybe through the clients. So you find that in the fraud risk management process, our focus has always been that we bring fraud risk management to the shop floor. Instead of being an afterthought process, we bring it to the front. That way, at the point of deciding or designing the solutions, at the point of agreeing and setting up partnerships, we ensure that we embed fraud risk management controls within that. Take, for example, in a health insurance claim, where a client has visited a hospital, then as an insurer, we receive that data. So we are supposed to settle that claim. So if we embed, and as a use case, we have actually embedded data analytics across that to ensure that between us and the medical providers, there is seamless flow of data. That when you visit a hospital today, we are able on a real-time basis to pick or to pick data to show that our client has visited our hospital today, and therefore we are expecting a claim in the next few days. So between the time that you as a client has visited the hospital to the time that we receive an actual invoice from the service provider, we will have run our validation. So data analytics comes in to do the validation process and be able to actually run all the checks, ensure that we've positively identified the clients, ensure that we have satisfied ourselves that there was an actual service that has been offered by the service provider. So meaning at that point, we have satisfied ourselves that this is a claim that we can admit. So by the time we're receiving the invoice, we are ready to pay. So that way we've embedded fraud management in the process, the claims process, and therefore it shortens the process and brings in efficiency.
Okay, that's bring to my last question, and that's to Pramod. With the specific use case we spoke about with big data analytics, there are certain extended use cases to this: fraud, abuse, risk, compliance, your customer segmentation, product marketing. Okay. Now, what role can technology play in terms of enabling institutions or organizations in the industry? Okay, and how can that help businesses create value for the stakeholders, which is ultimately your end customers or your employees? What role would technology play there?
It's an interesting play here again. Value to the end customer is in terms of not just better customer experience, but in terms of efficiency as well, because the more efficient you are, it translates into efficiency for the customer in the entire onboarding or ongoing management of the relationship perspective, right? Now, if you think about fraud, one of the ways in which fraud becomes an impediment to customer experiences, if you don't have a mechanism by which you can trust the data that is coming to you, you will start building a lot of controls and checks and balances in the process of the customer experience. Now, that is where it becomes a sort of a breakdown in an efficient customer experience for the end user of the product or service. Now, let's take an example, and I will use Simon on a rebound, the example that is taken, and I'll give an example of how that impacts. If you are a health claim policy holder with an insurance company, and you go to some remote clinic of a city or a country, and you use the service there. Now, at an insurance company level, they're wondering whether the service that you have used in that remote location in the country is actually a genuine transaction or not. Now, that remote institution, for a big hospital, it can be connected to the insurance company for real-time data transfer. But that remote clinic in some nook of the country is not connected. So how do you bridge the gap? Then you start building controls, checks and balances, people, and the same process of the claim that could have been approved maybe on a real-time or the same day basis will take up to a week, because there are a set of validations that the institution has to do, because it's a fiduciary responsibility. It is the client's money that they are managing, both as a bank or an insurance company. Now, how do you bridge that gap? And this is where my earlier point of first mile digitization becomes an important point. Is there a way in which we can reimagine the same journey where that claim that comes in from that clinic somewhere in the country can be digitized with accuracy, can be validated with certain independent data sources in the industry? So let's take an example. Someone submits an insurance health claim saying that it is for a purpose of a break in the hand. He's broken his hand, and therefore it is for the medical treatment. Now, in the claim, there will be medicines that are registered in the actual claim. Now, if you reimagine the power of data, you can do a reverse imputation of the medicines that are in the narration of the bill, and you can actually check it against a global medical database to validate what is the purpose of the database, what is the purpose of that medicine. Now, that's the place where the technology is now emerging, and that's where we actually as Perfios do an enormous amount of work. The ability to break down every narration, digitize that entire claim, break down every narration to the point that you can actually build a heat map. What is a typical normal distribution of a broken hand being fixed as a medical expense? If you have 100,000 transactions happening in a country, and you know what is the normal cost of that, and if someone is a fraudulent person and he is put a cost which is 40% more than what the normal cost of a treatment for a broken arm is, you will be able to isolate the problem as a potential fraud or an abuse. So the power of all digitization, as I see it, one of the holy grails which I'm kind of very committed to and excited about is how do we get that first mile digitized without waiting for the industry to evolve. So the first mile digitization in another way could be that the industry evolves, the regulator comes and says, this is the standard, everyone has to operate to the standard on data. But for a lot of the industry domains, banking and insurance in particular, there is no regulator that defines how a customer can submit a claim. And the data is completely analog. So if there is a way in which we can digitize that first mile analog data into hyper accurate information that the data science team at the bank level can start operating with, you then suddenly realize that it directly impacts the entire customer experience. So in some ways, we are an organization that is committed to serve the data science teams in the and the fraud teams in the insurance and the banking sector, where we clean the first mile data and deliver it in a form that they can use intelligently for building their customer journeys.
Thanks, Pramod. With this, I'll open the floor for questions from the audience, if any. We have already overrun time, so if there's no more questions, I think we are good to conclude. Thanks everyone. It was a wonderful panel and a wonderful audience to have it. And good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's show them some love. Let's show them some love. Appreciate him too. Thank you very much. Mr. Rutto, thank you so much. Let's appreciate him too. Our moderator. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The photo where the both of them will be. I wonder. Thank you. The photographer, are you good? Wonderful. Movie here. Men in Black. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's give them.